The dust devils twirled like drunken dancers across the barren street of Redemption, Arizona territory, as Thomas Tuck Blackwood slumped against the weathered post outside Hannigan's saloon, his eyes fixed on the empty horizon. 1875 had been a cruel year, and the West had been crueler still. Tuck had been riding for 3 days straight from the Texas border, his bones aching from hard travel and harder memories. At 32, he'd already lived enough for several lifetimes fought in the war, buried his parents, lost a brother to typhoid, and watched his small ranch wither under the punishing sun of a 3-year drought. All that remained was his reputation as one of the fastest guns in 3 territories, and his loyal paint horse, Domino, who stood hitched nearby, head drooping with exhaustion. "You look like you've been dragged behind a stagecoach," came a gravelly voice from the saloon entrance. Tuck didn't bother turning to face Barney Hannigan, the saloon's owner. "Feel worse than that?" "Well, come on in. First whiskey's on the house for any man who looks half dead. House policy." A hint of a smile tugged at Tuck's sun-cracked lips as he pushed himself upright. "That's mighty Christian of you, Barney." The saloon's interior offered blessed shade from the punishing afternoon sun. A few regulars hunched over tables, nursing drinks and grudges in equal measure. The place smelled of tobacco, unwashed bodies, and stale beer, familiar comforts to a man who'd been sleeping under the stars for too long. Tuck settled at the bar, removed his dusty black hat, and ran a hand through his sweat-matted dark hair. A whiskey appeared before him, and he nodded his thanks to Barney before downing it in one burning gulp. "Word is Judge Parker's looking for men," Barney said casually, wiping a glass with a rag that seemed to add more dirt than it removed. "Paying good money for deputies willing to ride into the nations," Tuck grimaced. "Not interested in wearing a badge, just passing along information. Man with your skills could do worse than steady pay." "And die faster, too," Tuck muttered. He pushed his glass forward for a refill, which he intended to pay for this time. The saloon doors swung open, flooding the dim room with harsh sunlight. Tuck squinted against the glare as a woman's silhouette appeared in the doorway. She stepped inside, allowing the doors to swing shut behind her, and Tuck felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. She wasn't conventionally beautiful, not like the painted women who worked the saloons. Her face was too angular, her skin too weathered by the sun. But she carried herself with a quiet dignity that drew the eye. Her dark blue dress was simple but clean, and her chestnut hair was pulled back in a practical bun. She looked like a woman with purpose, not one seeking company or employment. "Miss Katherine," Barney greeted her with surprising deference, "what brings you to my humble establishment?" "I need to speak with Mr. Donovan," she replied, her voice low and measured. "Is he here?" "Back corner." Barney nodded toward a table where a portly man in a banker's suit was playing solitaire. The woman Katherine nodded her thanks and walked toward the back, her spine straight as a ramrod. Tuck found himself watching her, intrigued by the contrast she presented to this rough-edged place. She bent to speak to Donovan, her words too quiet for Tuck to hear, but whatever she said caused the banker's face to darken. He shook his head emphatically. "Please, Mr. Donovan," her voice rose slightly. "Just a 3-month extension. The crops will come in by then." "I've already been more than generous, Mrs. Hammond," Donovan replied loudly enough for half the saloon to hear. "Your husband made promises he couldn't keep. That's not my concern." "My husband is dead," she replied, the words clipped and precise. "And I'm asking for a reasonable accommodation while I sort out his affairs. The bank isn't a charity, madam." Tuck could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her hands, but her voice remained steady. I'm aware of that, Mr. Donovan. I'm not asking for charity, I'm asking for time. Time is money, Donovan said with a smirk, gathering his cards, and I'm afraid you're out of both. For a moment the woman stood perfectly still. Then something unexpected happened. She laughed. It wasn't a laugh of amusement or joy, but something more complex, a sound that spoke of absurdity recognized, of reaching a point where anger gives way to a strange acceptance. It was brief, just a single, genuine burst of laughter that transformed her face entirely. In that fleeting moment, Tuck saw something rare, a spirit unbroken despite circumstances that would crush most souls. The laugh faded quickly, replaced by that composed mask once more, but it had changed something in the room. It had certainly changed something in him. "I see," she said, her composure regained. "Good day, Mr. Donovan." She turned and walked toward the door, her head high despite the humiliation she'd just endured. As she passed the bar, her eyes briefly met Tuck's. There was no plea in them, no recognition, just a clear, direct gaze that seemed to take his measure in an instant before moving on. After she had gone, Tuck turned to Barney. "Who is she?" "Katherine Hammond. Widow, her husband died last winter hunting accident. Left her with a small ranch about 5 miles east of town and a mountain of debt." Barney shook his head. "Shame, really. She's trying to hold onto the place, but Donovan's been itching to foreclose. Land's got the best water access in the county." Tuck's eyes drifted to Donovan, who was now chuckling with another well-dressed man. Something cold settled in Tuck's gut. He'd seen his share of men like Donovan, men who used ledgers instead of guns to take what wasn't theirs. "How much does she owe?" Tuck asked, surprising himself with the question. Barney raised an eyebrow. "Why? You planning on playing night in dusty leather?" Tuck shrugged, uncomfortable with the scrutiny. "Just curious." "Word is around $800, Barney said, leaning in. "Her husband borrowed against the property to buy breeding stock, then got himself killed before the investment paid off. $800. It might as well have been 8,000 to most folks in these parts." Tuck had exactly $23.16 to his name, enough for a few nights' lodging, some supplies, and maybe a poker game if he was feeling lucky. He wasn't sure why he cared about the widow's troubles. Lord knew he had enough of his own. But that laugh, that single, defiant laugh in the face of despair, had lodged itself somewhere in his mind, and he couldn't shake it loose. "Where would a man find work around here?" Tuck asked, draining his second whiskey. Barney's eyebrows shot up even higher. "Well now, the silver mine's always hiring, but it's dangerous work. Stagecoach company needs guards with the Flores gang causing trouble. And like I said, Judge Parker's deputies, not a lawman," Tuck interrupted. "And not looking to go down any holes in the ground neither." "Stagecoach it is then," Barney said. "Office is down by the livery. Ask for Willard. Tell him I sent you." Tuck nodded his thanks, laid coins on the bar, and stood. He settled his hat back on his head and walked out into the blistering afternoon sun, his mind made up, though he couldn't have said exactly why. That laugh. There had been something in it, a refusal to be beaten down by life's cruelties. He wanted to hear it again, but genuine this time. Wanted to be the cause of it. It was a fool notion, he knew. The kind of thinking that got men killed or heartbroken or both. But as he led Domino toward the livery, Tuck Blackwood made himself a promise. He would see Katherine Hammond laugh again, a real laugh, born of joy rather than bitter irony. And somehow, someway, he'd be the reason for it. 3 days later, Tuck sat atop the stagecoach beside the driver, a grizzled old-timer named Hank, shotgun balanced across his knees as they rattled along the dusty road toward Fort Collins. The work was simple enough: keep your eyes open, your gun ready, and hope to God you didn't actually need to use it. The pay was decent, the hours long, and it kept him away from temptation, namely, riding out to the Hammond ranch on some half-baked notion of offering help that would likely be unwelcome. "You're mighty quiet for a guard," Hank observed, skillfully navigating the team of horses around a bend. "Most fellas I ride with talk my ear off first day or two," Tuck shrugged. "Not much to say. Man riding shotgun who ain't talking is usually a man thinking too hard about something." Hank spat a stream of tobacco juice over the side of the coach. "Or someone." Tuck shot him a sharp look which only made the old man cackle. "Been driving stages for 30 years, son. I can read a man faster than most folks read a newspaper headline. You got woman troubles." "Don't have a woman to have troubles with," Tuck retorted. "Ah," Hank nodded sagely. "That's the worst kind." Before Tuck could respond, a flicker of movement caught his eye, a glint of light from the ridge about a quarter-mile ahead. He tensed, raising the shotgun slightly. "Hank," he said quietly, "up ahead on the right, someone's watching us." The driver squinted, then nodded almost imperceptibly. "Yep, been expecting trouble on this run. Payroll for the forts in the strongbox." Tuck's jaw tightened. "How many passengers?" "4. Drummer, Army lieutenant, and a woman with her boy. 8 years old or so. A woman and child. Damn." Tuck had hoped for an empty run for his first job. "Options?" he asked, eyes never leaving the ridge. "Can't outrun him with this load. Can't go back." Hank's weathered face was grim. "Just gotta hope they're not feeling ambitious today." They continued forward, the tension building with each rotation of the wheels. Tuck counted 3 riders now, emerging from behind rocks to flank the road ahead. He'd faced worse odds, but not with innocence to protect. "When I give the word," Tuck said quietly, "pull up. Don't stop completely." Hank gave him a sideways glance. "You got a plan?" Something like that. As they drew closer, the 3 riders moved into the road, blocking their path. All wore bandanas over their faces and had rifles trained on the coach. "Now," Tuck said. Hank pulled back on the reins, slowing the team but keeping them in motion. Tuck stood, balancing easily despite the rocking coach. "Afternoon, gentlemen," he called out, keeping the shotgun visible but not directly aimed. "Beautiful day for a robbery, but I'm afraid you've picked the wrong stage." "Get down and throw out the strong box," the center rider called back. "Nobody needs to die today." "That's mighty considerate," Tuck replied conversationally. "But here's my counter-offer. You boys turn around and ride away, and I don't have to put holes in you." The 3 men exchanged glances, clearly not expecting this level of confidence from a lone guard. "There's 3 of us and 1 of you," the leader pointed out. Tuck nodded. "Bad odds for you." He leveled the shotgun. "I'm Thomas Blackwood." There was a moment of silence as the name registered. Tuck didn't much care for his reputation, but in moments like this, it served a purpose. He'd faced down the Mason brothers in Abilene and walked away from the Cottonwood Creek shootout when 7 others hadn't. Stories grew with each telling, but the kernel of truth remained. He was faster and more accurate than most men had any right to be. The leader shifted in his saddle. "Blackwood, huh? Heard you was in Colorado. I get around." Tuck kept his voice casual. "Now, we both know how this ends if you persist, so I'll make it simple. Ride away and we all keep breathing. Stay and at least 2 of you stop. Maybe all 3 if I'm having a good day." He paused. "Are you feeling lucky enough to find out which of you gets to ride home?" The standoff stretched for what felt like minutes but was likely only seconds. Finally, the leader lowered his rifle slightly. "Another day, maybe," he said, clearly trying to save face. "Let's hope not," Tuck replied evenly. The 3 riders backed their horses off the road, then turned and galloped away. Tuck remained standing until they were well out of sight, then sat back down, heart hammering despite his outward calm. "Well, I'll be damned," Hank said, shaking his head as he urged the team forward again. 30 years on these routes, and I've never seen road agents back down like that. Just got lucky, Tuck muttered. Luck, hell. You scared him silly with just your name. Hank chuckled. Company's gonna be mighty pleased. That strongbox is carrying over $2,000 in payroll. $2,000. The amount made Tuck's mouth go dry, more than enough to pay off Katherine Hammond's debt and still have plenty left over. The thought came unbidden, and he pushed it away immediately. He wasn't a thief, no matter how noble the cause might be. Willard's gonna want to keep you on permanent after this, Hank continued. Man who can stop a robbery without firing a shot is worth his weight in gold. Tuck just nodded, his mind already calculating how many runs it would take at guard wages to save up $800. Too many, especially with the bank breathing down Katherine's neck. This woman, Hank said suddenly, the one you're not having troubles with because you don't have her, she wouldn't happen to be a certain widow with property east of town, would she? Tuck's head snapped around. What? Hank's weathered face split in a grin. Small town, son. Barney mentioned you were asking about Katherine Hammond right before you signed on with us. It's not like that, Tuck said stiffly. Never said it was. But a word of advice from an old man, Katherine Hammond's got more grit than most men I know. Been fighting to keep that ranch going since Thomas Hammond got himself killed last December. Proud woman, though. Won't take charity, and she won't take pity. I wasn't planning on offering either, Tuck said. Good, Hank nodded. Because what that woman needs isn't a savior. She needs a partner. The word hung in the air between them as the stagecoach rumbled on toward Fort Collins. Partner. It conjured images Tuck hadn't allowed himself to consider in years: a home, a shared purpose, perhaps even a family someday. All things he'd given up on after the war, after watching his own family farm wither and die in the drought. I barely know her, Tuck said finally. Hank just smiled. Yet here you are, taking a job you don't need, staying in a town you were just passing through. He shook his head. Son, I've seen men ride 1,000 miles for less inspiration than one genuine laugh from a woman like that. Tuck said nothing more, but Hank's words settled into him, undeniable in their truth. One laugh. That's all it had taken to change the course he'd been on. One moment of genuine humanity in a world that seemed determined to stamp it out. By the time they reached Fort Collins, delivered their passengers and cargo safely, and began the return journey to redemption, Tuck had made up his mind. He would help Katherine Hammond save her ranch, but not with charity or pity. He would offer what he had: his labor, his skills, his determination. And maybe, just maybe, he'd earn another laugh along the way. The first light of dawn was breaking over the eastern horizon when Tuck guided Domino down the rutted track that led to the Hammond Ranch. After returning to Redemption the previous evening, he'd collected his pay, rented a room at the boarding house, and spent a restless night planning his approach. Now, as the modest ranch house came into view, he second-guessed himself for the 100th time. The place was smaller than he'd expected: a weather-beaten main house with a covered porch, a barn that leaned slightly to one side, a corral with a few horses, and what looked like a chicken coop. Fields stretched behind the house, and in the distance, he could make out a small herd of cattle grazing, perhaps 20 head in all. It wasn't much, but it was more than most had in these parts. As he approached, a figure emerged from the barn: Katherine Hammond, dressed in men's work pants and a faded blue shirt, her hair tied back in a simple braid. She shaded her eyes against the rising sun, watching his approach with caution. A rifle appeared in her hands, not aimed at him but ready. Tuck raised a hand in greeting, stopping Domino at a respectful distance. "Morning, Mrs. Hammond," he called. "Name's Thomas Blackwood. Don't mean to disturb you so early." "Mr. Blackwood," she acknowledged, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "I remember you from Hannigan's. What brings you to my property at dawn?" Direct and to the point. Tuck appreciated that. "Heard you might be looking for help with the ranch," he said, deciding honesty was the best approach. "I'm looking for work." She lowered the rifle slightly, skepticism clear on her face. "I can't pay much. Barely keeping things going as it is." "I understand that." Tuck dismounted, keeping his movements slow and unthreatening. "I'm not asking for much. Room, board, and whatever you can spare when you can spare it." Catherine's eyes narrowed. "Why would a man like you work for almost nothing?" "Man like me? I've heard your name mentioned around town since I saw you at the saloon. You're a gunfighter, a hired gun for the stage line now." Her chin lifted slightly. "I don't need trouble coming to my door, Mr. Blackwood." Tuck took off his hat, holding it against his chest, a gesture of respect his mother had taught him long ago. "No, madam, you don't. And I'm not bringing any. I was a rancher before I was anything else. Grew up on a spread in East Texas. Know my way around cattle, horses, and crops." "And guns," she added pointedly. "Yes, madam, and guns." He met her gaze steadily, which might not be a bad thing for a woman alone trying to hold onto her property. Something flickered in her eyes, recognition, perhaps, that his words held truth. She studied him for a long moment, and Tuck had the distinct impression he was being weighed and measured by standards few men would understand. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why my ranch? There's plenty of work in these parts for a man with your varied skills." Tuck had prepared for many questions, but not this direct challenge to his motives. He could lie, make up some story about needing a quiet place to stay for a while, but something told him Katherine Hammond would see through any falsehood. "I saw you laugh," he said simply. "In the saloon, when that banker told you your time was up. Most folks would have broken down or lashed out. You laughed." He shrugged, feeling foolish now saying it aloud. "Made me curious about the kind of person who could find humor in that moment." Catherine's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "That wasn't humor, Mr. Blackwood, that was defiance," he finished for her. "I recognized it." She regarded him for another long moment, then sighed and lowered the rifle completely. "I can't afford your help," she said finally. "And I won't take charity. Not offering charity. Offering a fair trade my labor for room and board with wages when you can manage them. I've got some savings to tide me over." This last part was a stretch, but Tuck figured the stage line work would supplement whatever meager earnings the ranch provided. "And when the ranch fails?" she asked bluntly. "Because that's what Donovan and half the town are betting on." "Then I'll have wasted my time," Tuck replied with a slight smile. "Wouldn't be the first time." Something that might have been the ghost of a smile touched her lips. "You're either the most generous man I've ever met, Mr. Blackwood, or you have ulterior motives I haven't figured out yet." "Could be both," Tuck admitted. "But my immediate motive is breakfast, if you're offering. Been riding since before dawn." This earned him a short, surprised laugh, not the full, transformative one he'd witnessed in the saloon, but a genuine sound nonetheless. It sent a peculiar warmth through his chest. "I think I can manage breakfast," she said. "Though I should warn you, I'm a terrible cook." "Fortunate, then, that I'm not," Tuck replied, leading Domino toward the hitching post near the house. "My mother made sure all her sons could feed themselves properly." "A man who cooks," Katherine mused, walking beside him now. "You're full of surprises, Mr. Blackwood." "Tuck," he said. "Most folks call me Tuck," she nodded. "And most folks call me Kate." She hesitated, then added, "Though not many call me anything these days. It's been quiet since Thomas died." The simple admission carried the weight of months of solitude, of facing each day's challenges alone. Tuck recognized the tone. He'd heard it in his own voice often enough. "Well, Kate," he said gently, "I reckon things are about to get a bit less quiet around here." For the first time, a genuine smile transformed her face, not a laugh, but a promise of one, perhaps. In that moment, Tuck knew he'd made the right decision in coming here, whatever happened next. "I hope you know what you're getting yourself into," she said, leading the way toward the house. "This place demands everything and gives back precious little." Tuck looked around at the modest ranch, at the fields needing tending, the fences requiring mending, the barn listing to one side. It wasn't much, but it was something to fight for, something to build on. "Seems worth the effort to me," he said simply, and followed her inside. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of hard work from dawn until dusk. Tuck quickly discovered that Kate hadn't been exaggerating about the ranch's demands. The fences needed repair in a dozen places, allowing cattle to wander where they shouldn't. The barn roof leaked badly, endangering the winter hay supply. The irrigation ditch from the creek had silted up, starving the vegetable garden Kate maintained for her own subsistence. But for every problem, Tuck set about finding a solution. He mended fences, repaired the barn roof with salvaged lumber, and spent 2 grueling days clearing the irrigation channel. Kate worked alongside him whenever she could, proving herself as tireless and determined as Hank had claimed. They fell into an easy routine. Tuck would rise before dawn, start the coffee, and begin the morning chores. Kate would join him shortly after, and they would work separately or together as needed until midday. After a simple lunch, they would tackle the afternoon's tasks until sunset. Evenings were spent on the porch, planning the next day's work or simply sitting in companionable silence, too exhausted for conversation. 3 times a week, Tuck rode into town for his stagecoach guard duties, leaving Kate to manage alone. She never complained about his absences, seeming to understand that the extra income was necessary. What surprised Tuck most was how quickly he came to enjoy the quiet rhythms of ranch life again. He'd forgotten the satisfaction of mending what was broken, of nurturing growth, of seeing immediate results from his labor. For years, he drifted from town to town, taking whatever work came his way, usually involving his gun. The days had blurred together, marked only by trouble and the spaces between trouble. Here, each day had purpose, and each day brought him a little closer to understanding the remarkable woman who had drawn him to this place. Kate Hammond was not a woman who revealed herself easily. She spoke little of her past or her marriage, focusing instead on the present challenges and future plans for the ranch. But in small moments, the way she gently handled a newborn calf, the careful attention she gave to the wildflowers growing along the fence line, the quiet humming when she thought no one was listening, Tuck glimpsed the person beneath the determined exterior. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Kate broke their comfortable silence. "Why did you really come here, Tuck?" she asked softly. "And don't tell me it was because of a laugh in a saloon. Men like you don't change their path for something so small." Tuck considered his answer carefully, watching a hawk circle lazily over the distant fields. "What kind of man do you think I am, exactly?" She turned to look at him, her profile gilded by the fading light. "The dangerous kind. The kind with ghosts following close behind." "We've all got ghosts," he said quietly. "Yes, but yours carry guns." She sighed. "I've heard stories in town about Abilene, about Cottonwood Creek." Tuck's jaw tightened. "Stories grow in the telling. So they weren't true?" "Some were." He looked down at his hands, calloused now from ranch work rather than just gun handling. "I've killed men. Won't deny that, but never for pleasure and never without cause." Kate nodded slowly. I believe that, but it doesn't answer my question. Why here? Why my ranch? Tuck looked out over the property, the land that had begun to feel like something close to home in just 2 short weeks. Maybe I was tired of destroying things, wanted to build something for a change. He paused. Or maybe I recognized something in you that day in the saloon, a refusal to be beaten. I'm still losing, she said quietly. Just more slowly now, thanks to your help. You've got 3 months until Donovan expects his money, Tuck reminded her. A lot can happen in 3 months. Kate laughed softly, but there was little humor in it. $800 might as well be $8,000. The cattle aren't ready to sell, and even if they were, prices are down. The vegetable garden will feed us but won't turn a profit. I've gone over the numbers 100 different ways, Tuck. There's no path to that kind of money before the deadline. The defeat in her voice stirred something protective in Tuck. There's always a way. Such as, he hesitated, then decided honesty was called for. I've been asking around town. There's a horse auction in Fort Collins next month. Army buyers will be there looking for remounts. Kate's eyes widened slightly. You think we should sell horses? Not just any horses, trained ones. Tuck leaned forward, warming to the topic. You've got 4 good mares and that stallion with the bloodlines. He's half Morgan if I'm not mistaken. He is, Kate confirmed. Thomas paid good money for him, hoping to start a breeding program. That's what I figured. Tuck nodded. If we can train those yearlings, you've got get them saddle broke and responsive, they'd fetch a good price from the army. Maybe not enough to clear the debt entirely, but it would be a start. Kate stared at him, a spark of something like hope lighting her eyes. You can train horses. My brother was the real horseman in the family, but he taught me plenty before he passed. Tuck smiled slightly. And those yearlings look smart. Good conformation, strong legs. For the first time since he'd arrived, Tuck saw genuine excitement on Kate's face. The chestnut filly is particularly bright. She follows me around like a dog when I'm in the corral. That's the one I'd start with, Tuck agreed. We've got 6 weeks before the auction. It's enough time if we work them every day. Kate nodded slowly, calculation replacing excitement. Even if we got $100 each for the 3 yearlings, that's only $300, still far short. It's $300 more than we have now, Tuck pointed out, and there are other possibilities. The stage line's offering bonuses for guards on the dangerous routes. I could take a few of those runs. Those are the routes where robberies are common, Kate said sharply, where men get killed. The concern in her voice warmed Tuck more than it should have. I can handle myself. I know you can. That's not, she stopped, then shook her head. It's too dangerous, there must be another way. We'll find it, Tuck assured her, touched by her worry. The horses are just a start. Tomorrow we'll go through everything on the ranch, see what else might bring in money. Kate was quiet for a moment, her eyes on the last sliver of sun disappearing below the horizon. Why are you doing this, Tuck? Truly, this isn't your fight. Maybe I decided it is. He met her gaze steadily. Maybe I'm tired of just passing through places, leaving nothing behind but trouble and stories that grow with each telling. And maybe, she said softly, you're running from something and my ranch is as good a hiding place as any. Tuck couldn't help but smile at her perception. Could be that too. Are you running from something? He considered the question, wanting to give her the truth she deserved. Not in the way you might think. No posses or bounty hunters on my trail if that's your concern. It wasn't, she said simply. I'm running from what I became after the war, Tuck admitted, surprising himself with the confession. From the man who found it too easy to solve problems with a gun because he'd forgotten there were other ways. Kate's expression softened. The war changed many men. It did. But that's no excuse for the choices I made after. Tuck looked down at his hands again. I had a ranch once, you know, in East Texas. not much bigger than this one. Lost it in '71 after 3 years of drought killed most of my cattle." "I'm sorry," Kate said quietly. "After that, I drifted. Took whatever work came my way, found out I was good with a gun." He shrugged. "It's an easy path to follow once you start down it, and a hard one to leave," she observed. "Yes." Tuck looked up at her. "But worth leaving, I think." Their eyes held for a long moment, and Tuck felt something shift between them, a deepening of understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of trust. Whatever it was, it felt fragile and precious. Kate was the first to look away, rising from her chair. "It's getting late. We should both get some rest if we're starting horse training tomorrow on top of everything else." Tuck nodded, standing as well. "Yes, madam." She paused at the door, looking back at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Thank you, Tuck, not just for the help with the ranch, but for—" She hesitated. "For making it less quiet around here." Before he could respond, she had disappeared inside, leaving Tuck on the porch with the emerging stars and the peculiar feeling that something important had just happened, something he wasn't quite ready to name. The weeks that followed tested both their endurance and their optimism. Training the yearlings proved more challenging than Tuck had anticipated. The chestnut filly was indeed intelligent but also willful, testing his patience daily. The other two, a bay gelding and a black filly, were more tractable but less quick to learn. Kate proved to have a natural way with the horses, her gentle persistence often succeeding where Tuck's more direct approach failed. Between the horse training, regular ranch chores, and Tuck's stage line duties, they worked from first light until well after dark most days. Yet despite the exhaustion, there was a growing sense of partnership between them, a rhythm of cooperation that required few words and yielded impressive results. By the time the Fort Collins horse auction was a week away, all 3 yearlings were saddle broken and responding well to basic commands. They weren't fully trained by any means, but they showed enough potential to attract buyers looking for army remounts or personal saddle horses. The morning they were to leave for Fort Collins, loading the horses into the small wagon-drawn trailer Tuck had repaired for the journey, Kate seemed unusually quiet. She worked efficiently as always, but there was a tension in her movements that hadn't been there before. "Something wrong?" Tuck asked as they secured the trailer gate. Kate shook her head, then sighed. "Just worried, I suppose. We're placing a lot of hope on these horses." "They'll fetch a good price," Tuck assured her. "You've done a fine job with them." "We've done a fine job," she corrected him, offering a small smile. "I couldn't have managed it without you." The simple acknowledgement warmed Tuck in a way that had become dangerously familiar. Over these weeks, he'd found himself increasingly drawn to Kate, not just to her determination and courage, but to the small moments of vulnerability she occasionally allowed him to see. The way she sometimes gazed at the sunset with a wistfulness that spoke of dreams deferred. The rare, precious times she laughed without restraint at some mishap or joke. He'd come here because of one laugh, and now he found himself living for the next one and the next after that. "We should get going," he said, pushing away thoughts that could lead nowhere good. "It's a long ride to Fort Collins." Kate nodded, turning toward the house. "Let me get my things." As she disappeared inside, Tuck checked the harness on the wagon team, his mind racing with calculations. Even if the horses brought the prices he hoped for, they'd still be well short of the $800 needed. His extra stage line work had added another $100 to their funds, but it wasn't enough, and time was running out. There was one option he hadn't discussed with Kate, a high-stakes poker game held monthly in the back room of Hannigan's saloon. With the $200 they had now, he might be able to win enough to make up the difference. But it was a desperate gamble. the kind of risk he'd sworn off when he decided to help Kate save her ranch. His brooding was interrupted by Kate's return, now wearing a clean blue dress and carrying a small valise. She looked different, more like the composed woman he'd first seen in the saloon than the ranch worker he'd come to know. Her hair was neatly arranged, her face freshly washed, and Tuck was struck anew by her quiet beauty. "You look nice," he said, the words slipping out before he could consider them. A hint of color touched her cheeks. "Thank you. Thought it best to look presentable for the auction. First impressions matter when you're selling horses." "They certainly do," Tuck agreed, helping her up onto the wagon seat. He climbed up beside her and took the reins, keenly aware of her presence next to him, close enough that her skirt brushed against his leg when the wagon moved. As they pulled away from the ranch, Kate looked back at the house, her expression pensive. "Do you think it's worth it?" she asked suddenly. All this struggle to hold onto a piece of land, the question caught Tuck by surprise. "You having doubts?" "Sometimes," she admitted, "when I'm most tired. I wonder if Thomas would have wanted this, me fighting so hard for a dream that was more his than mine." Tuck considered her words carefully. "What was your dream, then?" Kate's gaze remained on the receding ranch house. "I never thought much beyond the day-to-day. When we married, I was just happy to have a home, someone who cared for me." She shrugged slightly. "The ranch was Thomas's vision. I was along for the journey. And now," she turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the morning light, "now I find myself fighting tooth and nail for something I'm not sure I ever truly wanted. Isn't that strange?" "Not strange," Tuck said thoughtfully. "Sometimes we don't know what matters to us until someone tries to take it away." Kate studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yes, I suppose that's it. It's not just the land, it's what it represents. Independence. A future I can shape myself." She smiled ruefully. "And stubbornness, if I'm being honest. I don't like being told I can't do something." "I've noticed," Tuck said dryly, which earned him a genuine laugh, not the full, transformative one from the saloon, but closer than any he'd heard since. The sound lifted his spirits immeasurably. They traveled through the morning, conversation flowing more easily than it ever had before. Kate spoke of her childhood in Missouri, her journey west with her family after the war, and her marriage to Thomas Hammond, a kind man, she said, if somewhat impractical in his dreams. Tuck shared stories of his own upbringing in East Texas, his brief time in the Confederate cavalry, a fact Kate received with a raised eyebrow but no comment, and his years running the family ranch after his parents died. Neither spoke much of the darker times, Kate of her husband's death, Tuck of the gunfights that had built his reputation. Those shadows hovered at the edges of their conversation, acknowledged but not examined too closely. By the time they reached Fort Collins late that afternoon, a new ease had grown between them, a comfort in each other's company that felt both natural and precious. They secured rooms at a modest hotel near the auction grounds, stabled the horses where they could be viewed by potential buyers, and shared a simple dinner in the hotel's dining room. "We should get some rest," Kate said as they finished their meal. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Tuck nodded, though the thought of returning to his solitary room held little appeal. These hours with Kate away from the constant demands of the ranch, able to simply talk and learn about each other, had been unexpectedly wonderful. "Tuck," Kate said hesitantly as they stood in the hotel corridor between their rooms, "thank you for everything you've done. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know I'm grateful." "We're not done yet," he reminded her gently. "Those horses will sell well, you'll see." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Always the optimist. "One of us has to be," he replied with a slight grin. Kate laughed softly, and before Tuck could react, she reached up and placed a light kiss on his cheek. "Good night, Tuck," she whispered, then quickly disappeared into her room. Tuck stood frozen in the corridor, his cheek tingling where her lips had touched it. Something powerful and terrifying unfurled in his chest, a feeling he'd thought himself incapable of after so many years of emotional numbness. It left him breathless, exhilarated, and deeply afraid. Because Katherine Hammond was becoming far more to him than a woman whose laugh he wanted to hear again. She was becoming someone he couldn't bear to lose, and if they couldn't save her ranch, losing her was exactly what would happen. The auction grounds hummed with activity as buyers and sellers examined horses, negotiated prices, and sized up the competition. Kate and Tuck had arrived early to prepare their yearlings, grooming them until their coats gleamed and exercising them just enough to take the edge off without tiring them. "The army buyers are over there." Tuck nodded toward a group of uniformed men making methodical rounds of the pens. "They'll be looking for sound conformation, good temperament, and basic training. Our three should catch their eye." Kate nodded, nervously smoothing the chestnut filly's mane. "She's the best of the lot. If any of them sell well, it will be her." "They'll all sell," Tuck assured her, though his own confidence was less certain than his words suggested. The auction had drawn more horses than he'd expected, many from established breeders with solid reputations. Their 3 yearlings, while promising, would be competing against animals with documented bloodlines and professional training. As the morning progressed, Tuck's concerns deepened. The army buyers passed their pen with only cursory interest, their attention drawn to a larger consignment of matched bays from a Colorado Springs breeder. Other potential buyers stopped to look, but none showed serious interest until midday, when a well-dressed man in his 40s paused to study the chestnut filly with an appraising eye. "Fine-looking animal," he commented, addressing Tuck rather than Kate. "Morgan bloodlines." "Yes, sir," Tuck confirmed. "Her sire is half Morgan, dam is quarter horse. She's smart as a whip and gentle-natured." The man nodded, gesturing to the filly. "Mind if I take a closer look?" "Not at all." Tuck opened the pen gate, allowing the man to enter. The potential buyer ran his hands down the filly's legs, checked her teeth, and observed her eyes and ears with the practiced movements of someone who knew horses well. "She's been saddle broke?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Kate answered, stepping forward. "I've been working with her myself. She takes a rider easily now and responds well to basic commands." The man glanced at Kate with mild surprise, as if only now noticing her presence. "Your horse, madam." "Our ranch," Kate said firmly. "My late husband started the breeding program and we've continued it." She gestured to include Tuck, who felt a peculiar warmth at being described as part of a "we" with Kate. "I see." The buyer's expression remained neutral. "Would you mind demonstrating her under saddle?" "Of course," Kate agreed readily. Within minutes, they had the filly saddled and Kate was walking her in a small circle, demonstrating the animal's responsiveness and smooth gait. The buyer watched attentively, his interest clearly growing as Kate put the horse through simple maneuvers. "She's not fully trained," Kate acknowledged as she dismounted, "but she's quick to learn and eager to please." "I can see that." The man nodded thoughtfully. "I'm opening a small ranch north of here, looking for foundation stock with good temperament." He studied the filly for another moment. "What are you asking for her?" Tuck and Kate exchanged a quick glance. They had discussed pricing before coming to the auction but hadn't settled on firm numbers. $150, Kate said, her voice steady despite the boldness of the figure nearly twice what yearlings typically brought at auction. The buyer's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's steep for a yearling, even one with her potential." "She's worth every penny," Kate replied, her quiet confidence more persuasive than any hard sell could have been. And she comes with my personal guarantee of her soundness and temperament." The man studied Kate for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll give you 125, cash." Kate hesitated, glancing at Tuck, who gave a slight nod. It was a good offer, especially in a buyer's market. "Sold," Kate agreed, extending her hand to seal the deal. The buyer shook it firmly, then reached into his coat for a wallet. "I'll take her now if that's acceptable. Save us both the auction fees." "Of course," Kate agreed, relief evident in her voice despite her composed expression. As they completed the transaction and helped the buyer lead the filly away, Tuck felt a surge of optimism. One horse sold, and for a better price than they dared hope. If the other two brought similar amounts, they'd be significantly closer to their goal. But as the day wore on, that optimism faded. Despite their best efforts, the bay gelding and black filly attracted only modest interest. By the time the auction officially began, they had received no offers matching the price of the chestnut. "We could hold them back," Tuck suggested as they watched the first lots being sold, prices consistently lower than they'd hoped. "Try again at another auction." Kate shook her head, her expression resolute. "We don't have time for that. Donovan expects his payment in 6 weeks. We need whatever we can get today." She was right, of course. Tuck nodded reluctantly, and they entered their 2 remaining horses in the auction. The results were disappointing. The bay gelding brought $80. The black filly only 75, respectable prices under normal circumstances, but far less than they needed. By the time they settled their accounts with the auction house and paid the feed and stabling charges, they had a total of $260 from the horse sales. "It's not enough," Kate said quietly as they sat in the hotel dining room that evening, the day's earnings counted out on the table between them. "Even with what we had saved and your stage line wages, we're not even halfway there." Tuck studied her face in the lamplight, seeing the fatigue and disappointment she was trying to conceal. "We still have options," he said carefully. "Such as," he hesitated, knowing she wouldn't approve of what he was about to suggest. "There's a high-stakes poker game at Hannigan's. Happens monthly. Next one's in 2 weeks. Kate's eyes widened. "Gambling, that's your solution. It's not ideal," Tuck admitted, "but I'm good at cards, very good. Good enough to risk everything we've worked for." Kate's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby diners. She lowered it again, leaning forward. "Tuck, if you lose what we have now, we'll have nothing left to work with." "I know the risks," he said quietly, "but we're running out of time and options, unless you've got another way to come up with $500 in 6 weeks. Kate was silent, her fingers absently tracing the edge of the table. Finally, she looked up at him, her expression troubled. "Have you ever lost? At cards, I mean." The question caught him off guard. "Yes," he answered honestly, "but not often, and never when it really mattered." "This matters," she said softly. "This matters more than anything has in a long time." The weight of her words, the trust implicit in them, settled heavily on Tuck's shoulders. "I know," he replied, his voice equally soft. "That's why I'll win." Kate studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "All right, but not everything. We keep half back no matter what. I won't risk being left with nothing." It was a sensible precaution, one Tuck couldn't argue with. "Agreed." "And Tuck," Kate's eyes held his, unwavering, "no gunplay. No matter what happens at that table, promise me." He understood her concern. High-stakes games often led to high tensions, and more than one had ended in bloodshed. "I promise," he said solemnly. "No guns." Kate nodded, seemingly satisfied, though worry still creased her brow. "Then I suppose we have a plan. God help us." Tuck reached across the table, covering her hand with his own. "It'll work out, Kate, trust me." She looked down at their joined hands, then back to his face. "I do trust you," she said quietly. That's what scares me." The simple admission, laden with implications neither of them was ready to address, hung in the air between them. Tuck wanted to reassure her, to promise that her trust wasn't misplaced, but the words caught in his throat. Because the truth was, he wasn't sure he trusted himself, not with money, not with guns, and certainly not with Kate's heart, which he was increasingly afraid he might be holding without having any right to it. Instead, he squeezed her hand gently, then withdrew his own. "We should get some rest." "Long ride home tomorrow," Kate nodded, rising from the table. "Good night, Tuck." As he watched her walk away, Tuck was struck by the strange turn his life had taken. 2 months ago, he had been a drifter with a dangerous reputation and no fixed destination. Now he was a rancher again, or trying to be, with responsibilities, purposes, and feelings he'd thought long buried. All because of a laugh in a saloon. All because he'd decided, on impulse, to chase something beautiful rather than run from the ugliness that had defined too many years of his life. Whatever happened next, whether they saved the ranch or lost it, Tuck knew he couldn't go back to the man he'd been before. Kate Hammond had changed him, awakened parts of him he'd thought dead, and for that alone, he owed her more than he could ever repay. The ride back to redemption was subdued, both of them lost in their own thoughts about the challenges ahead. Upon their return, they threw themselves back into ranch work with renewed determination. There were fences still needing repair, cattle to be moved to fresh pasture, and endless other tasks that had been postponed during the horse training. Tuck continued his stage line work, now taking the more dangerous routes as he'd considered before. The pay was better, but the risk correspondingly higher. Twice he found himself in shootouts with would-be robbers, returning to the ranch with powder burns on his sleeve and a grin set to his jaw that Kate pretended not to notice. She never asked about those incidents, and he never volunteered details. It was an unspoken agreement between them he would do what was necessary to contribute to their cause, and she would not question methods she couldn't bring herself to approve. As the date of the poker game approached, tension built between them. Kate grew quieter, more withdrawn, while Tuck found himself obsessively practicing card handling in the evenings, making sure his fingers retained the dexterity and precision he'd once been known for at gaming tables across the territory. The night before the game, they sat on the porch as usual, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The air was cool, hinting at the autumn that would soon arrive, and Kate had wrapped a shawl around her shoulders against the chill. "Are you sure about tomorrow?" she asked suddenly, breaking a silence that had stretched for nearly half an hour. Tuck nodded, not looking at her. "As sure as I can be." "That's not very reassuring." He turned to her then, seeing the worry etched in her face. "Nothing in life is certain, Kate. You know that better than most." "Yes," she sighed, pulling her shawl tighter, "but some risks seem more foolish than others." "Sometimes foolish risks are all we have left," Tuck said quietly. "Sometimes they're the only thing standing between us and surrender." Kate was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "I've been thinking," she said finally, "about what happens if we lose, if Donovan gets the ranch." The thought sent a chill through Tuck that had nothing to do with the evening air. "We're not going to lose." "But if we do," she persisted, "I need to know what comes next." It was a question Tuck had been avoiding, not just with Kate but in his own mind. What would happen to them, to whatever was growing between them, if the ranch was lost? Would she stay in redemption? Would she want him to stay with her? "What do you want to happen?" he asked carefully. Kate's hands twisted in her lap. "I don't know. I've been focused so completely on saving this place that I haven't allowed myself to consider alternatives." She glanced at him. "What about you? Will you move on when this is over, one way or another?" The question struck at the heart of Tuck's own uncertainty. He had come to redemption on impulse, drawn by a laugh and a moment of defiance. He had stayed because of the woman he'd come to know, her strength, her determination, her rare moments of vulnerability. But he had never allowed himself to think beyond the immediate goal of saving her ranch. "I don't know," he admitted. "I haven't thought that far ahead either." "That's not an answer," Kate said softly. "No, it's not," Tuck sighed, running a hand through his hair. "The truth is, Kate, I came here for reasons that made sense at the time but don't seem adequate now. I stayed because—" He paused, searching for words that wouldn't reveal too much. "Because it felt right. Working beside you, fighting for something worthwhile instead of just surviving day to day. And when the fight is over," she pressed. "Win or lose," Tuck looked at her directly, allowing himself to acknowledge what he'd been feeling for weeks now. "I don't want to leave," he said simply. "But I don't know if there's a place for me here if there's no ranch to work." Kate held his gaze, something unreadable in her eyes. "There might be," she said quietly. "A place for you, I mean, if you wanted it." The implications of her words hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to define them more clearly. Tuck's heart raced with possibilities he'd scarcely allowed himself to consider. "Kate," he began, not sure what he was going to say but needing to say something. She shook her head, standing abruptly. "We should both get some rest. Tomorrow is important." She hesitated, then added, "Whatever happens at that poker game, Tuck, thank you for everything." Before he could respond, she had disappeared into the house, leaving him alone with the stars and the whisper of possibility in the cooling night air. The poker game was held in a back room of Hannigan's saloon, accessible only by invitation or reputation. Tuck had both, thanks to his history in the territory and Barney's good word. As he entered the room at the appointed hour, he was struck by how familiar it felt: the green baize table, the soft clink of chips, the smell of cigar smoke and whiskey. This had been his world once, before he'd found something better at the Hammond ranch. 5 men were already seated, with space for a 6th at the table. Tuck recognized 2 of them, a cattle buyer named Morstan and a land speculator whose name escaped him. The others were strangers, though their types were familiar enough. A gambler by profession, judging by his immaculate dress and carefully neutral expression. A miner or prospector with calloused hands and keen eyes, and a portly man whose expensive suit marked him as likely a businessman of some sort. "Blackwood," Barney greeted him from his position as dealer and house representative. "Glad you could join us. Buy-in is $200. Tuck nodded, counting out the money, most of what he and Kate had managed to save. It felt heavier than it should have, weighted with responsibility and promise. "Gentlemen," he acknowledged the table as he took the empty seat. "Hope you don't mind a new face." "Not at all," the gambler replied smoothly. "Fresh money is always welcome." There were chuckles around the table, but Tuck detected an undercurrent of tension. His reputation had preceded him, it seemed. "Just cards tonight," he said easily, sensing their concern. "Left my hardware at home." This seemed to relax the atmosphere slightly, and Barney began dealing the first-hand 5-card draw, with the prospector opening the betting. Tuck played conservatively at first, folding more hands than he played, watching the others' styles and tells. The gambler was skilled but cautious, rarely bluffing. The businessman played aggressively but showed his disappointment too readily when hands went against him. The cattle buyer, Morstan, was the most dangerous, unpredictable, and seemingly comfortable with risk. An hour in, Tuck had won a few small pots but lost more, his chip stack dwindling worryingly. Kate's warning echoed in his mind. They'd agreed to risk only half their savings, but at this rate, even that would be gone before midnight. He needed to change tactics, to take bigger risks. The next hand, a variant of stud poker, gave him the opportunity. With 3 kings showing and a possible straight for Morstan, the betting grew heated. Tuck raised, then raised again when Morstan called, driving the others out of the hand. "Mighty confident for a man with just 3 showing," Morstan observed, eyeing Tuck's dwindling chip stack. "Confidence is all most of us have," Tuck replied mildly, raising once more. Morstan studied him for a long moment, then reluctantly folded. "Too rich for my blood." Tuck showed his whole card, the 4th king, and raked in the pot, nearly doubling his chips. It was a turning point. For the next 2 hours, he played with calculated aggression, reading the table with a skill born of years of practice and necessity. His stack grew steadily, then dramatically when he caught the businessman bluffing with nothing but ace-high. By midnight, he had tripled his initial buy-in. The businessman had left, cleaned out, and the prospector was down to his last few chips. Only the gambler, Morstan, and the land speculator remained as serious competition. "One more round, gentlemen," Barney suggested, shuffling the deck with practiced hands. "Winner take all." It was a common in-game in these high-stakes sessions, one final hand with everything on the table. Risky, but potentially the fastest way for Tuck to reach the amount he needed for Kate's mortgage. "I'm in," Tuck agreed, pushing his considerable stack to the center. "Likewise," the gambler nodded, his face revealing nothing. "Why not?" Morstan added his chips to the pot. "Been a pleasure losing to you fellows all night. Might as well finish the job." The prospector and land speculator exchanged glances, then shook their heads, withdrawing from the final hand but remaining to watch the outcome. Barney dealt 5 cards to each remaining player, face down. 7-card stud, high-low split with a range of wild cards that made the game as much about nerve as skill. Tuck picked up his cards one by one, the 10 and jack of spades, promising. The 3 of clubs, less helpful. The ace of diamonds, very good. And finally, the queen of spades. 3 high cards, all different suits. Not terrible, but nothing guaranteed. He arranged them carefully in his hand, keeping his expression neutral as he assessed his chances. "Betting opens with you, Mr. Blackwood," Barney prompted. Tuck considered his options. A modest bet would keep both opponents in the hand, but a large one might force one out, improving his odds. 100, he said, pushing forward chips from his stack. The gambler studied him for a long moment, then matched the bet without comment. Morstan whistled softly but followed suit. 2 cards, Barney announced, dealing the next round. Tuck received the king of spades and the 4 of hearts. The king gave him a potential royal flush if he could draw the missing cards, but the odds were long. Still, it was the best possible hand if he could complete it. 200, he bet, raising the stakes significantly. The gambler hesitated, then folded with a rueful smile. "Too steep for what I'm holding." Morstan's eyes narrowed, measuring Tuck. "Call," he said finally, matching the bet. The final card came the 9 of diamonds for Tuck. No help for his flush attempt, but it gave him a straight possibility if Morstan couldn't beat it. 300, Tuck bet, committing most of his remaining chips. Morstan studied his own cards, then Tuck's face, searching for any hint of weakness. "You're bluffing," he said finally. "I call and raise another 100. It was more than Tuck had left. "I'm short," he admitted. "Your watch should cover it," Morstan suggested with a predatory smile. "Unless you're not as confident as you appear." Tuck hesitated. The watch had been his father's, one of the few personal items he still carried from his former life, but the stakes were too high to back down now. "Fine." He removed the timepiece and placed it on the table. "Call." "Gentlemen, show your hands," Barney instructed. Morstan laid down his cards with a flourish, 3 aces and a pair of 10s. A full house, a powerful hand that would win most games. Tuck's heart sank as he realized his straight wouldn't beat it. All the work, all the risk for nothing. Kate would be devastated. Then he remembered the wild cards. In this variant, deuces and one-eyed jacks were wild. He scanned his hand again and realized the jack of spades, a one-eyed jack, was indeed wild. He could use it as any card he needed. With a slow, deliberate movement, he arranged his hand the ace of diamonds, king of spades, queen of spades, jack of spades as the 10 of spades, and the actual 10 of spades. A royal flush. He laid the cards down carefully. Royal flush spades. The table fell silent as the other players absorbed what they were seeing. Morstan's face darkened with disbelief, then anger. "You cheated," he accused, half rising from his chair. "No man's that lucky." "It's not luck," Tuck replied calmly. "It's knowing how to play the cards you're dealt." The jack of spades is wild in this game, as Barney explained at the outset. Morstan looked to Barney for confirmation, his face flushing when the saloon keeper nodded. "House rules were clear," Barney affirmed. "The hand stands. Mr. Blackwood wins the pot." For a tense moment, Tuck thought Morstan might cause trouble, but the cattle buyer finally subsided, muttering curses under his breath. "Well played, sir," the gambler said, offering Tuck a respectful nod. "Fortune favors the bold, it seems. And those who pay attention to the rules," Tuck added with a slight smile, gathering his winnings nearly $1,500 in cash and chips, far more than he dared hope for. As he cashed out with Barney, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Kate, her face tight with worry. "Tuck," she called, ignoring the stares of the remaining players. "Is it over?" He turned, surprised to see her. They'd agreed she would wait at the ranch, not wanting to draw attention to their partnership or purpose. "It's over," he confirmed, crossing to her with his winnings secured in an inner pocket. "We should talk outside." Once they were on the boardwalk in front of the saloon, Kate's composure cracked. "I couldn't wait," she admitted. "I kept thinking about all the things that could go wrong, and I had to know." "It's all right," Tuck assured her, unable to suppress a smile. "I won, Kate, more than enough." Her eyes widened. "You won how much?" "Nearly 1,500, he said, still hardly believing it himself. "More than enough to pay off Donovan and have something left over for improvements to the ranch." Kate stared at him for a moment, then did something that caught him completely off guard. She threw her arms around his neck and hugged him fiercely. "You did it," she whispered against his shoulder. "You actually did it." Tuck stood frozen for an instant, then carefully wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. It felt right in a way few things ever had. Kate in his arms, the weight of their shared burden lifted, possibility stretching before them. "We did it," he corrected gently. "Couldn't have managed without you." She pulled back slightly, looking up at him with eyes that shimmered in the lamplight. "Tuck," whatever she had been about to say was interrupted by the saloon doors bursting open. Morstan emerged, his face flushed with drink and anger, a pistol in his hand. "Blackwood," he shouted. "Nobody makes a fool of Jack Morstan." Tuck reacted instinctively, pushing Kate behind him and facing the angry man. "Put the gun away, Morstan. You lost fair and square." "The hell I did," Morstan snarled, raising the pistol. "You cheated somehow, had to have." "I didn't," Tuck said evenly, aware of Kate's presence behind him, of how quickly this could turn deadly. "And you know it. You're just too proud to admit you were outplayed." Morstan's hand wavered slightly. "Give me back my money and we'll call it even." "Not going to happen." Tuck kept his voice calm, though his mind was racing through options. He'd promised Kate no gunplay, but he hadn't anticipated being confronted by an armed, angry loser. His own pistol was back at the ranch, left behind as a gesture of good faith. "Then I'll take it from your corpse," Morstan declared, steadying his aim. Time seemed to slow. Tuck calculated the distance between them, knowing he couldn't close it before Morstan fired. He tensed, preparing to dive sideways and draw Morstan's fire away from Kate. "Stop." Kate's voice rang out, and to Tuck's horror, she stepped out from behind him. "Mr. Morstan, please. That money is to save my ranch, my home. Tuck won it fairly." "Kate, get back," Tuck urged, trying to move in front of her again. But she stood her ground, facing Morstan directly. "If you shoot him, you'll have to shoot me too. And then you'll hang for murder, and what will your money be worth then?" Morstan blinked, his aim wavering as he confronted not just an armed opponent but a determined woman who showed no fear despite the gun pointed in her direction. "The lady's right, Jack." Barney's voice came from the saloon entrance, where he stood with a shotgun. "Put it down before you do something you can't undo." The standoff held for another heartbeat, then two. Finally, Morstan lowered his pistol, his shoulders slumping. "Damn fool game anyway," he muttered, turning away. Tuck let out the breath he'd been holding, his heart hammering. "Kate, that was reckless, I know," she finished for him, her own voice shaking now that the danger had passed. "But I couldn't let him shoot you, not when we've come so far." Tuck stared at her, seeing her in a new light, not just as someone to protect, but as a partner who would stand beside him even in the face of danger. It humbled him and filled him with a warmth that had nothing to do with the night air. "Let's go home," he said softly. "We've got a mortgage to pay off in the morning." Kate nodded, a smile breaking across her face like sunrise. "Home," she repeated. "Yes." They walked toward the livery where they'd left their horses, side by side, not touching but close enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed. Something had changed between them tonight, boundaries crossed, truths acknowledged without words. Tomorrow they would face Donovan, settle the debt, and secure Kate's future. But tonight, beneath the vast starlit sky, they were simply a man and a woman walking home together, carrying hope and possibility between them like a precious, fragile gift. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself was celebrating their victory. They rode into town together, the money safely secured in Tuck's jacket, their spirits high despite the lingering tension from the previous night's confrontation. Donovan was in his office at the bank when they arrived, his eyebrows rising in surprise as Kate entered with Tuck close behind. "Mrs. Hammond," he greeted her with poorly concealed disdain. "I wasn't expecting to see you until the payment deadline next week." "I've come to settle my account in full," Kate replied, her voice steady and confident. "Today." Disbelief flashed across Donovan's face, quickly replaced by calculation. "I see. Well, that's unexpected. The full amount is $823, including interest accrued to date." Tuck stepped forward, laying the money on Donovan's desk with deliberate care. "Count it," he suggested. "You'll find it's all there, plus a little extra." Donovan's eyes narrowed as he looked from the money to Tuck, then to Kate. "I heard there was a high-stakes game at Hannigan's last night. I assume this is the result. The source of the money isn't your concern," Kate said firmly. "Only that the debt is paid in full." "Of course." Donovan's smile didn't reach his eyes as he counted the money, his disappointment evident despite his attempt to hide it. "Everything appears to be in order." He opened a drawer, removing a document. "This is the deed to your property, Mrs. Hammond, free and clear of all liens." Kate took the paper, her hand trembling slightly, the only indication of the emotion she must be feeling. "Thank you, Mr. Donovan." "Don't thank me," he replied, unable to completely suppress his bitterness. "It seems you have Mr. Blackwood to thank for your good fortune." "We thank each other," Kate corrected him gently, glancing at Tuck with a warmth that made his heart skip. "Good day, Mr. Donovan." They left the bank together, stepping out into the bright morning sunshine. Kate stood for a moment on the boardwalk, staring down at the deed in her hands as if she couldn't quite believe it was real. "We did it," she whispered. "It's really over." "Not over," Tuck said quietly. "Just beginning." She looked up at him, a question in her eyes that neither had been brave enough to ask directly until now. "Beginning what, exactly?" Tuck took a deep breath, knowing this was the moment to lay his cards on the table, so to speak. "Whatever you want, Kate. Whatever you'll allow me to be part of." Her expression softened, vulnerability and hope mingling in her gaze. "And what do you want, Tuck?" It was a simple question with a complicated answer, one that encompassed everything he'd come to feel for this remarkable woman over the past months. The laugh that had first drawn him to her had been just the beginning, a glimpse of a spirit he now knew to be as resilient as it was compassionate. "I want to stay," he said simply. "With you, on the ranch. I want to build something that lasts, for once in my life, instead of just passing through." He paused, then added softly, "I want to hear you laugh again, not from defiance or relief, but from joy. And I want to be the cause of it as often as possible for as long as you'll have me." Kate's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her smile was radiant. "I think that can be arranged," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "In fact, I'm counting on it." Before Tuck could respond, she rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his, a kiss as sweet and promising as spring rain after drought. He pulled her closer, heedless of the curious glances from passers-by, losing himself in the miracle of this moment, this woman, this future suddenly opening before him. When they finally drew apart, Kate was laughing a full, uninhibited sound of pure joy that transformed her face just as it had that first day in the saloon. But this time, there was no bitterness in it, only happiness and a touch of wonder. "There it is," Tuck murmured, touching her cheek gently. "The laugh I've been working toward all this time. And you've earned it," she assured him, her eyes dancing. "Though I expect you to keep earning it every day from now on." "Yes, madam," he agreed solemnly, though he couldn't suppress his own smile. "I intend to." They walked hand in hand to their horses, the deed to the Hammond ranch, now their ranch, tucked safely in Kate's pocket. As they rode home through the golden autumn landscape, Tuck reflected on the strange and winding path that had brought him here. One laugh in a saloon. One moment of defiance that had sparked something in him when he thought nothing could. And now, a lifetime of possibilities stretching before them, seasons of planting and harvest, of struggle and triumph, of quiet evenings on the porch watching the stars emerge. Most precious of all, a lifetime of Kate's laughter earned through joy shared, challenges faced together, and love that had grown from the most unexpected of beginnings. 5 years later, Tuck stood on the porch of the Hammond ranch house, considerably expanded now, with a new wing and a fresh coat of white paint, watching a sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold. In the yard before him, Kate was teaching their 3-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, how to feed the chickens, the little girl's delighted giggles floating on the evening air like music. The ranch had prospered beyond their expectations. With the remaining money from Tuck's poker winnings and Kate's careful management, they had expanded the cattle herd, improved the breeding program, and added 20 acres of prime grazing land. The Hammond horses, as they called their stock, had developed a reputation throughout the territory for their intelligence and sound conformation. Tuck himself had changed nearly as much as the ranch. The gunfighter was gone, replaced by a man who worked with his hands to build rather than destroy. He still carried a pistol when necessary. The West remained a dangerous place in many ways, but it was no longer his primary tool or identity. "Papa, look," Elizabeth called, holding up a freshly gathered egg with the reverent care of a child handling treasure. "I found it all by myself." "That's wonderful, Lizzie," Tuck called back, his heart swelling with love for this little person who combined Kate's determination with his own stubborn streak, creating a force of nature in pigtails and a pinafore. Kate looked up, meeting his gaze over their daughter's head, and smiled that same transformative smile that had first captured his heart in Hannigan's saloon. In that moment, Tuck felt the full circle of their journey, from strangers to partners to family, and the profound rightness of it all. Later, after Elizabeth had been tucked into bed with stories and kisses, Kate joined Tuck on the porch for their nightly ritual of watching the stars emerge. She settled beside him on the bench he'd built last summer, leaning comfortably against his shoulder. "Good day," she asked, though she knew the answer. "The best kind," he replied, slipping an arm around her waist. "You, she nodded, nestling closer. "The garden's coming along nicely, and Mr. Peterson from Fort Collins sent word he wants to buy 2 of our yearlings for his daughter." "That's good news. His money's always reliable." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, content in each other's company and the peace of the evening. Such moments were precious to Tuck, these quiet interludes between the busy rhythm of ranch life and family responsibilities. "I saw Donovan in town today," Kate said suddenly. "His bank's in trouble, overextended on some mining investments that didn't pan out." Tuck raised an eyebrow. "Can't say I'm sorry to hear it." "Neither am I, really," Kate admitted, "though I try to be charitable in my thoughts." "You're a better person than I am," Tuck said with a chuckle. Kate turned to look at him, her expression serious despite the lightness of their conversation. "No, I'm not. You're a good man, Thomas Blackwood, the best I've ever known." The simple declaration, delivered with such quiet certainty, humbled Tuck as it always did when Kate expressed her faith in him. "Only because you saw something in me worth believing in," he said softly. "I saw a man who could make me laugh when I thought I'd forgotten how," she replied, reaching up to touch his face gently. "A man who was willing to risk everything for someone he barely knew because he recognized something in her that resonated with something in himself." "Defiance," Tuck murmured, echoing their conversation from years ago. "Hope," Kate corrected him, her eyes reflecting the first emerging stars. "It was always hope, disguised as defiance because I was too afraid to admit I still had some left." Tuck pulled her closer, overwhelmed as always by the depth of connection between them, a bond forged through shared struggle, mutual respect, and love that had grown steadily stronger with each passing season. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come into Hannigan's that day?" Kate asked. "If our paths had never crossed?" "Sometimes," Tuck admitted. "But then I look at what we've built together, this ranch, our home, our family, and I can't imagine any other path. It's as if everything in my life, good and bad, was leading me to that moment. To you." Kate smiled, then laughed that full, joyous laugh that had started everything. "For a former gunfighter, you have quite a poetic streak, Mr. Blackwood." "Only with you, Mrs. Blackwood," he replied, using the name she had taken 2 months after they paid off the mortgage, in a small ceremony at the local church with half the town in attendance. "Only with you." As the stars multiplied overhead and the night deepened around their home, Tuck reflected on the strange and winding path of his life. From the Texas ranch of his childhood to the battlefields of the war, from the dusty streets where he'd built his reputation to this peaceful porch where he now sat with the woman he loved, it had been a journey he could never have predicted or planned. And it had all turned on a single moment, one laugh in a saloon, one spark of defiant hope that had ignited something long dormant within him. A moment that had changed everything, setting him on a path to redemption, purpose, and love. Every day since, he had worked to earn that laugh again, to bring joy rather than sorrow, to build rather than destroy, to love rather than fear. And in doing so, he had found not just Kate's laughter but his own as well, rediscovering parts of himself he'd thought lost forever. As the night grew cooler, they rose together and went inside, closing the door on the vast western sky and the ranch that had become the center of their shared world. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new opportunities to grow what they had started together. But for now, in the warmth of their home, with their daughter sleeping peacefully and their future secure, Thomas Tuck Blackwood knew a contentment he had never dared to imagine possible. One laugh had changed his life, and he would spend the rest of his days making sure it was never the last.